Welcome to The Conservative Edge. I'm Dr. Joe Coury, your host. This show is about substance on each and every issue. There is no fake news in here. And today's show is a very special show. It's about race and racism in America. We have a fantastic guest, Mr. Woodson of the Woodson Institute. We will introduce Mr. Woodson later and his new book. But for now, I start with my opening statement. The intensity of racial division in America did not subside. Every time the public feels that it is behind us, it rears its ugly head with increased intensity and ever newer claims. There is a racism industry that never ceases to infiltrate and influence the body politics in America. Under President Obama, the American people felt relief. It was fleeting. Racism is now taking on new dimensions through actions often violent and a new vocabulary that is intolerable. President Biden is doubling down. All is intended to inflame and revise the American culture along racial and woke lines that the majority of Americans do not endorse. I repeat, do not endorse. We have decided to look at the major elements of the actions, the legislations, and the proclamations by many minority leaders that are undermining democracy and the rule of law and hurting the very groups they were intended to protect. The current United Nations ambassador, boy, what an interesting lady, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, was howling about systemic racism in a regrettable and insulting speech while she occupies a very high post in the administration with numerous blacks in cabinet and sub-cabinet position and numerous other areas. She also conveniently forgets that the US had 8 years of Obama presidency. Well, if we had systemic racism, why didn't you take care of that? She did not mention any of the institutions in the United States today set up to disadvantage, discriminate against, or undermine blacks in America, nor any policy within any institution that was implemented to specifically hurt black Americans in any way. If anything, we may be going backward. The COVID stimulus bill that was recently enacted into law allows for any black farmer with a $100,000 mortgage to cancel his debt, while a white farmer who competes with him in the marketplace cannot do so. This is reverse discrimination, plain and simple. We now invite Mr. Woodson to comment on these and many other issues. Bob Woodson is our guest today. He is a civil rights veteran and founder and president of the Woodson Center, a national anti-poverty non-profit organization. He's also the senior editor of a book which I think is desperately needed in this country, Red, White, and Black, Rescuing American History from Revisionists and Race Hustlers. I look forward to reading it. Mr. Woodson, I'm grateful that you are on this show. I believe that you and I will have a very engaging and very constructive discussion on race and racism in America. Mr. Woodson, is there any U.S. institution today set up to disadvantage, discriminate, and undermine blacks in America?
No, absolutely not.
I agree, Mr. Woodson. I agree. I believe fundamentally whatever remnants there are, they come from people who have sickness in their heart, not because, and they have very flawed judgment. But let me ask you another question, if I may, regarding that topic. Do you know of any policy within any institution right now that specifically hurt black Americans?
No.
Okay.
60% of black Americans polled to say if racial discrimination is a limit to them, they said no too.
Understood. Now I'm going to bring another issue up regarding that systemic racism. The COVID stimulus bill, I'm sure you've probably read it or at least looked at the summary of it. They allow any black farmer who has a $100,000 mortgage or a little bit more to wipe it out. But the same privilege is not afforded to a white farmer. who is competing with the black farmer in the market for goods and services. Would you consider that reverse discrimination?
It is absolutely reverse discrimination. It is based on a false premise.
Okay.
You can't end racism by being racist. Racist policies to end racism.
I agree totally. Now let me go to another subject, the reparation bill that passed the House and still has a long way to become law. And if I may ask you a series of questions about reparation, and then I'll give you a chance to give me a brief answer. Was the Emancipation Proclamation a form of reparation?
Absolutely, and so was the whole Civil War.
Agreed.
It consumed 3/4 of a million people.
That's exactly right. The 620,000 died in the Civil War, Mr. Woodson. And at the time, America had only 31.5 million citizens. 31.5. 620,000 overwhelmingly white died in order to erase slavery. Is that form of reparation?
It is.
Good. Now, the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, they were very bold, and I think the leadership of of many of the black leaders, of course, especially Martin Luther King, had made a huge difference. Is that a form of reparation?
It is.
Okay.
Let's add one footnote to your thing about slavery. There were 5,000 blacks that were slaves to Native American, the 5 civilized tribes. They were free blacks who owned slaves as well. And the question is, do the descendants of those blacks and Native Americans who owned slaves, do they pay or do they receive?
Understood. Were affirmative action, as you know, affirmative action was at one time the rule of the game, so to speak, and especially in colleges and in hiring. Was that a form of reparation?
I would say it is. So were the poverty programs that spent $22 trillion in over 50 years.
Agreed.
Of reparations.
Agreed. Now, as I'm sure you very well know, that about 80 federal programs that intended to help minority, and many of those minority participants happen to be black. Is that a form of reparation?
You have to understand that 70 cents of every dollar spent on the poor did not go to the poor.
Exactly.
It went to those who served the poor.
Exactly.
And they ask which problems are fundable, not which ones are solvable.
African Americans right now running for offices all over the country, all types of offices, from the House, the Senate, the governorship, the presidency. Is that a form of reparation?
I don't know if you'd call it reparations, but it's a reality that we have to face.
Yeah, but it's a reality that did not happen until recently, and many of the black candidates for the various offices have shown us that that can in fact be true Americans in every sense of the word.
Yes.
In a sense that reparation has. Now, the problem with the reparation, Mr. Woodson, if I may just indulge you a little bit, is where is the money going to come from? Is it going to come from, for example, the general fund? And if it comes from the general fund, it will include taxes by African American. Should that be excluded from the reparation payment? That's number one. Number two is it also, when the money will come from about 50 million Americans who are foreign born, that have nothing to do with the past mistakes of the United States. And furthermore, what will happen for those who are mixed races? And how much is enough? In other words, once you make the first payment, does it have to be an annual payment or a monthly payment or whatever? The fact of the matter is, as you are implementing the law, if there is one, you're creating all kinds of division in this country and all kinds of resentment. How would that work? How about the poor white who feels he deserves also some form of reparation because of his poverty, and so on and so forth? Your ideas.
Well, I think the whole discussion of reparations for all of the items you just identified makes it really a ridiculous discussion, because you cannot monetize past pain suffered by people And also, what does victory look like? Whenever you begin something, you should always look at the end in mind and say, well, what does victory look like? What problem would reparations solve of the out of wedlock births that are sweeping the communities? The violence that is consuming thousands of people, increasing every year. How would reparations address that? How would reparations address the undereducation of children, including white children? 39% of all white children are reading at grade level. And so how would reparations address the lack of upward mobility for people?
If every ill in this, yeah, I agree with you totally. If every ill in this country has to have its own form of reparation, we'll be a very broke country. There's not enough money we could possibly collect from anybody in order to address every single ill in our society, to, of course, to include reparation. Anyhow, let me move on right now. As you know, we've had so many new words introduced to our vocabulary. And many of them are allegations against racism, or a way to remedy racism. And let's see whether you agree, disagree, or you have a different idea about them. I'm going to start with this outrageous idea that 2 + 2 is not equal to 4. Now, I'd like to know who's the idiot who's going to be teaching that course, number one. And number two, most importantly, I'd like to know whether the students of such a course, the students in such a course, are victims or are they in fact students? I'd like to just mention that I believe that Benjamin Banneker, Katherine Johnson, and Mary Jackson are rolling in their graves right now as you and I discuss this issue. Your comments?
It really is. I think that the Smithsonian's Black Civil Rights Museum, they issued a tweet last year that says that showing deferred gratification is whiteness. Coming to work on time is whiteness. Speaking in standard English is whiteness. All of the bourgeois values that explained how Black families survived slavery and Jim Crow by pursuing excellence and self-determination, learning how to read and excel, all of the values and virtues that enabled Black families to resist and overcome slavery and discrimination are now being defined by the radical left as being synonymous with racism. Mm-hmm. And so it's just absolutely ridiculous. As I said, you cannot use racism to eradicate racism.
I totally agree. The fact of the matter is, ignorance is not a solution to anything. Ignorance actually makes everything worse. Because when you say 2 + 2 is not equal to 4, how about the great mathematician who happened to be Black? Were they all stupid, or they all did not recognize the fact that their Blackness matters? Come on, it's so ridiculous. And let me tell you what else is ridiculous. BLM says, well, if you don't give us our right, you don't do what we want, guess what we're going to do? We're going to demonstrate, we're going to burn, we're going to loot, we're going to do all of that stuff. How does that address anything? Because the poor person is paying for the mistakes of the system. So therefore, they go out, destroy a store, two couple of stores. Some of the stores are owned by Blacks, actually. And so the innocent is paying for the victimization, the alleged victimization by whites. That makes no sense, or by the police, or whatever. So however we support them, I mean, they received like $100 million in contributions. Are you kidding me? So they could what? Demonstrate and kill some more people and destroy some more property? Your words.
Well, also we have to ask ourselves, why are corporations giving $98 million to Black Lives Matter when the Black Lives Matter representative in Chicago, when asked about the burning and looting of stores, she said that's a form of reparations. Agreed. And so the question is, why would a store like Nike company continue to contribute to Black Lives Matter when in fact they burned and looted a Nike store? And my conclusion is Nike is quite willing to sacrifice the burning of a store if it can continue to make sneaks overseas in China and then bring them back to the United States and sell them to inner city Black youngsters for $200.
Well said.
So Nike is just delighted to be able to contribute to this because it deflects attention away from the fundamental problem is why isn't Nike setting up manufacturing companies in these high unemployment Black areas so that young people and young families can work to help themselves rather than demand reparations.
Okay, cancel and defund the police. You know, I heard of stupidity, but this level of stupidity just stuns me. Let me tell you why. The biggest victims of crime, look at Chicago, look at many of the cities, Baltimore, Milwaukee, and so on and so forth. The biggest victims, where the crime is rampant, are really Black communities. And they need the police more than any other communities. Homicides have doubled, as I'm sure you know, in some of these communities. And you want to defund the police? Now let's assume there is an emergency in your house. Who do you want to call? You want to call BLM to come and save it for you? I mean, come on. It's so ridiculous to empower such an organization which is intent on destroying the core families in this country and on mayhem whenever certain policy does not suit them. Your ideas?
I just think that this is the most destructive, self-defeating proposal ever made. Because as you pointed out, the people who are advocating this don't have to live with the consequence of what they're proposing. The head of Black Lives Matter just bought a $1.3 million mansion in a very exclusive white community in California, where it is protected by white police officers. So therefore, she does not have to worry about defunding the police. The head of city council in Los Angeles also advocating defunding the police while she has personal police escorts at her home. And I could go on and on, official after official, celebrities. LeBron James, who's advocating it, lives in an exclusive mansion. But the people who are suffering the consequence of it are the ones who are living in the inner cities. The Woodson Center has organized 2,500 Black mothers who lost children to urban violence called the Voices of Black Mothers United. And they have come together and taken out a full-page ad in USA Today opposing defund the police. 82% of all Blacks surveyed are opposed to defund the police.
So they know where to get protection. They know who to call in the case of emergency, don't they?
They really do. But what it's doing by eroding confidence in our law enforcement, there is a crisis in recruitment. There's a 60% shortfall in recruitment of police officers. They're retiring in record numbers. Many of them are out on disability. And therefore, in some cities, the 911 wait time is 30 minutes. From the time someone calls 911, it's 30 minutes before a police officer will respond. And that response time is only going to get worse.
Agreed.
Because a lot of the Al Sharptons of this world live in buildings that are secured by private security.
Understood. White shaming is our next topic. Now, I've heard of silly things, but white shaming. There is a very private school in New York, I'm sure you heard about them, the Breeder School. And what they do is they wanted white kids to stand at the door and basically denounce their privileges, their white privileges. Now, this is a school that costs $67,000 a year per student. What I find incredible is how is the white who's being shamed, how does he become more sensitive to Black people if in fact it is about destroying his character and personality? That's number one. And number two is, how does a Black community benefit from this? How does that benefit from this? Is it a way to establish moral superiority of sort? What do you think?
I just think it's fundamentally Marxist. I just think it's destructive. No one can tell me what the end game is. What does victory look like? And you know, and whites. I said there are two groups of people who disturb me more than any other, and that is self-flagellating, guilty white people, and self-appointed, rich, well-educated, angry Black people. I think both groups are causing a real decline in this nation, a real decline. But it's just absolutely ridiculous. Again, we should always begin with these proposals with the end in mind and ask those who are advocating these, what does success look like? Show me a white person that has been excised of racism. What is it they're going to do that's different than what they did before?
Well said. The next issue is equity versus equality. Have you figured out the difference, Dr. Woodson, or do you think the equality will give Blacks less than they deserve? Therefore, we discuss equity. What do you think?
Well, equity is demanding equal results, and equality is an equality of an opportunity to produce. I mean, there is not equity even in families. Thomas Sowell mentions this point that of the 29 astronauts, 23 of them are the firstborn.
What happened to the second-born?
Yeah,
they don't go to the moon, is that it?
So that there isn't even equity in families, let alone society. And equity says that everybody will get deserves an equal share of the trophies, that there'll be no competition. We'll just give out trophies based upon your participation. It is the most self-defeating. In San Diego public schools, they took the highest performing students and looked at the lowest performing because it was a racial disparity, rather than try to find out how the kids who were underperforming could be motivated to improve. What they did was dumb down the standards and no longer require all the kids to turn in their homework on time.
Let me just set the stage to another aspect of this. Let's assume you and I are watching basketball, right? At one time, on the floor on the basketball court, there may be 10 Black players, right? How does the principle of equity help us address this issue if in fact it needs to be addressed? I don't see 10 Black players on the court. I see 10 superstars on the court. But if to the extent that you want to focus on their Blackness and the fact that there are no white players on the court, how does that address the issue of equity if in fact you needed to modify it?
Well, I think one of the ways to, first of all, let me say that Black men are 6% of the US population, and they're 80% of the National Football League players and the NBA players, National Basketball Association players. Now, but no one complains about that, but I would like to see a group of white players file an equity complaint against the NFL and insist that white players be represented based upon their percentage of the population. I think we should take the rules as they are laid out and rigidly apply them and challenge them that way. I'd love to see a group of 10 white players say that we're being discriminated against based upon the numbers, and we insist that the number of white players, or at our universities, look at the number of white and Black players in the student population, and our athletic teams should reflect their percentages in the population.
Meritocracy in sport has served minorities in this country very effectively. A veritable democracy will extend this fundamental principle across the economic and social landscape.
No, I agree. And again, whenever they talk about inequities, They're always negative inequities, but they don't explain positive inequities, that why are Blacks disproportionately represented on the athletic field and underrepresented in math classes and in English classes and physics classes. On the one hand, if it's a negative disparity, they say it's racism. If it's a positive disparity, they're silent on it. And you can't have it both ways. Either
Exactly
the principle
right.
works or it doesn't.
I agree very much. Nicole Hannah-Jones treated us to a book about the Project 1619. It coincided with the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first African to Virginia. And the idea here is that, but for the Blacks, we could not have built this country. These are some of the founding members, so to speak, if they were going full right, of the American dream, so to speak. Would you agree with Ms. Jones that, in fact, 1619 should be the focus of our history as opposed to 1776?
No, absolutely not. And that's why we established 1776 as the date of our Declaration of Independence as the only legitimate birthday of America. And in fact, after we have challenged Nicole Hannah-Jones, she has since gone back and modified and revised that statement and said that 1619 was not the birth date of America. So she has, but they haven't changed it in the textbooks, but she has publicly backed off of that and revised it. And
but to do the project, the project in of itself was kind of offensive to me.
It was.
What is wrong with saying 1776 of this? What is right about teaching students that 1776 somehow did not matter? It's just idiotic.
Well, it's an attempt on the part of the radical left to denigrate the country. They really, I think, want to replace democracy with socialism. They don't care about pursuing justice for Blacks. They're just using it as a surrogate for their hatred of the country and the denigration of our values. That's why in the riots you saw that started following the death of George Floyd, yes, they quickly migrated to burning Bibles in Portland, Oregon, and burning the American flag and saying that the nuclear family is Eurocentric and therefore racist. What does that have to do with anything?
In conjunction with what you just said, the cancel culture has become unbearable, at least to somebody like me. I am an immigrant to this country. I came here when I was a teenager, and I cannot imagine where anywhere else in the world would have given me the advantages that I have in this country. I never received a special privilege. I earned everything I got, everything. Went to the best school in the world for finance, taught for 27 years in the finest universities, lectured in 45 countries. I did it because I believe that in America, when you do the right thing, you will always get ahead. And my kids have exactly the same sentiment about all of this. With hard work, you get good results. Stay out of trouble, you'll get good results. Love your neighbor, you'll get good results. What's up now with the cancel culture? What are we canceling? We canceling Abraham Lincoln? Are you kidding me? The author of the Emancipation Proclamation? What are we canceling? Are we canceling that the culture that we have created called the American culture? Are we canceling all of those who have written the U.S. Constitution? What are we canceling? And what is the benefit from canceling these people? Bringing down the statue of Abraham Lincoln. Are you kidding me? Taking his name off government buildings or school buildings like they did in San Francisco. Is that a way to address racism? Is there anyone in the history of this country who worked harder for Black people than Abraham Lincoln? I am mystified. Your words, please.
Well, I think it's going even farther that they took down Frederick Douglass's statue too in New York, Rochester, New York. Also, recently a student wrote an essay quoting Dr. King, and she was not permitted to offer that essay because the teacher said that because Dr. King used the word Negro, that was offensive to Blacks, and therefore Dr. King's essay would not be permitted. So don't be surprised if the next step is to take down the statue of Dr. King.
You got to be kidding.
Because radical left white people believe they have the power and the right to set the living standards for Blacks, and the civil rights leadership, the Black elected officials are turning their backs on their own people and on the traditions that explain Black survival in America. And that is one of the most shameful things that I think I've witnessed in the last 50 years.
Some of the Black movements started in churches. Now, what's up with the attack on churches, like the attack on St. John Church in front of the White House? Why would anybody want to do this? And how does that help any African American?
It doesn't help any. I mean, when you go back, as we have done in our essays at 1776, and examined what are the principles and values and virtues that undergird our success, it was self-determination, a belief and support of the nuclear family, and our Christian faith. Those were the three pillars, and every one of those are being attacked by Black Lives Matter. And they're not being defended by civil rights leaders.
I think the Black majority does disagree with BLM. However, they have been very silent. I know you have spoken out on many issues, and I've seen you on television many a times. But the point here is, some of the things are so offensive and they're so out of whack, so to speak. Why doesn't the majority of Black people in America, why don't they take a stand?
Well, I just think that's what we're helping to promote. But the left has been very, very skilled at keeping Black America angry, aggrieved, resentful, in a constant mood of protest. There's enough residue of anxiety over race, and race is very critical, and the left does know how to exploit that very emotional issue by taking the experiences of a few and then generalizing it to the whole population of people.
Well, BLM, if they demonstrated anything, is that aggressive conduct, destructive conduct can bring in a lot of money so they could go buy fancy houses and everything else. How much of the $100 million accrued, how much of it has accrued to the poor African American living in the ghetto?
I don't think of a single dollar has gone there. I know that question now is being raised even by people inside the Black Lives Matter movement. Where does that money go? And the leader of the Black Lives Matter movement recently $3.4 million in real estate properties, mansions, not just one, but several.
Now the question is, if the money is not going there and it's being kept by the so-called promoters of violence, the question I ask here, that will promote more groups that will seek to be violent in order to collect $100 million and in order to have these fancy houses.
Like I call them the plight of Rick Smartses.
All right. Now about the BLM stand on family and sex. There is no such thing as a male or a female, right? There is no such thing as a female or a male. What's in the middle? What is in the middle? What is in the middle? If you are not a boy, what are you? If you are not a girl, what are you? And if you are always confused about your identity, sexual identity, how does that help the black man on the street?
It doesn't. It doesn't.
The Chauvin case, the verdict is out. Demonstrations were mostly jubilant about the outcome. What do you think about the process that led us to this? And what do you think, most importantly, about the way forward?
I think it was as a mob rule decision. The very fact that the President of the United States, for the first time in their history, personally commented on a active trial. Maxine Waters came down with her police escort from the Capitol, and to say if the right verdict of guilty doesn't come down, that people should riot. Again, this is an unprecedented interference into the judicial branch, and it may be the basis upon which his conviction is overturned, which means if it is, it's going to be more violent. So Maxine Waters and the president are contributing to conditions that could ultimately lead to increased violence and increased deaths, increased looting of Black-owned businesses. So it's ironic that their attempts to victim signal could have the consequence of destroying more Black life in the name of social justice.
Understood. Chauvin, there was likely appeal based on the points that you have made. There will probably be an appeal. I don't know whether the appeal will be successful. I'm not a lawyer, but most legal experts I listen to think that the appeal will not be successful. But the fact of the matter is, what has the Black community learned from this? And I'll let you make these your last comments.
I think the Black community has learned that justice is almost for sale, that they are now convinced that if you want to direct a decision, all you got to do is riot. They're even saying that if it wasn't for the riots, they wouldn't have gotten this conviction. And that's a very dangerous proposition to take, but that's what the left is saying. We got this conviction because we riot, and anytime a police officer shoots a Black person, then we are going to riot, which means there'll be a further decline in the police. There's going to be a mass exodus of police, and it's going to, because what the left wants to do is they want to have a national police force that a small group of tyrants can control, the way they have it in communist countries. That's what they're out for. They want to do away with local control of law enforcement so it can be centralized with the federal government. And that's on our way to totalitarianism.
Is it possible for any African American to get an identification card? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Everybody could get it. It's free. Number one, is free, and number two is they're thinking about having a mobile unit to go to houses of people who are too elderly to walk or to. So what is the problem? You know, to enter the White House, you need this. To go on an airplane, you need an identification card. What is wrong with having an identification? When I went to vote the other day, there's a guy who came in and he said, "My name is such and so." She checked him in, and he never showed any identification. Anybody could vote. HR 1 will give anybody, including illegal immigrants, the right to vote. Now, how is that American?
That doesn't help America. And like I said, that it's insulting to Blacks to say that they don't have an ID. Obama didn't allow them to come into the White House without an ID. Is he racist?
Mr. Woodson, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed it very much. I am a professor. I've written extensively, but I appreciate good thoughts, especially well-founded good thoughts. And you have plenty of them, and I'm grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
We are glad you were with us on this episode of The Conservative Edge. As you could see, we deal with tough issues. We always look for the facts. There is no fake news in here. Hopefully you will join us in future editions of The Conservative Edge. If you have any comments to make, please go to theconservativeedge.com. One word, theconservativeedge.com. You could see previous shows and you could make any comments you wish. Thank you for your participation.